After his death, mathematicians discovered something no one had planned. Every mathematician the world called the greatest of their generation traced back to one man. Not Einstein, not Turing, not von Neumann. A man who owned nothing. No home, no position, no institution, no salary. He carried everything he owned in a suitcase and knocked on the doors of the greatest mathematicians in the world. And every door opened. How is that possible for a human being? My name is John von Neumann. My name is on the architecture that every computer in the world runs on. I worked on the atomic bomb. I am considered by many to be the most versatile mathematical mind of the 20th century. And I could not explain Paul Erdős. That is why I need to tell you this story. Princeton, in 1938. The most concentrated gathering of mathematical genius in human history. Einstein walked those corridors. Hermann Weyl walked those corridors. I walked those corridors. We wore suits. We had offices, salaries, reputations that stretched across continents. Then Erdős arrived with his suitcase. He was 25 years old, Hungarian, Jewish, like me, fleeing Europe because staying meant death. Princeton gave him a full year. When it ended, they offered 6 months, half of what he had expected. They found him, in their own words, uncouth and unconventional. He accepted, without complaint. He packed his suitcase and moved on. Every institution in the world would have begged him to stay. Princeton sent him away. What happened next is why I am telling you this story. Because before Princeton dismissed him, Erdős had already done something that should not have been possible. At 19 years old, still a student, he published his first paper. A proof about prime numbers. Chebyshev had proved the same theorem in 1850. Ramanujan had improved the proof in 1919. But no one, in nearly a century of trying, had found a proof so simple that a student with no advanced training could follow it. Erdős found one, 19 years old. The greatest mathematicians in Europe read it, and went quiet. That was the man Princeton found uncouth. After Princeton, Erdős did something no one in mathematics had ever done. He did not look for another institution. He did not apply for another position. He simply started walking. From mathematician to mathematician, city to city, door to door, across a continent. He would arrive, sometimes announced, sometimes not. He would set his suitcase in the corner and ask the same question. What is your hardest problem? Think about what that required. Not the mathematics, the conviction. To walk up to the most formidable minds on earth and say, I have nothing to offer except my brain. Is that enough? It was always enough. That is the part I cannot explain. In 1941, my friend Stanislaw Ulam called me from Madison. He said Erdős had been there for several weeks and had solved problems we had been sitting on for years. I said, send him here. He arrived at my house on Westcott Road. I opened the door. He stood there, slightly stooped, wearing clothes that had traveled as much as he had, holding his suitcase. He said, John, my brain is open. What is your hardest problem? We worked for 3 days without stopping. My wife Clara found him writing equations on the kitchen paper at 3 a.m. She asked, who is this man? I said, I genuinely do not know. I was the man who understood everything. I did not understand Paul Erdős. Here is what made him different from every mathematician I had ever known. Most great mathematicians build. They construct enormous theoretical frameworks, vast architectures of logic that explain whole categories of the universe at once. I did this. Einstein did this. We built cathedrals. Erdős solved puzzles. Old, stubborn, specific puzzles. Problems sitting untouched for 20, 50, 100 years. Problems that sounded childlike when you stated them, yet had defeated every serious mind that touched them. And he believed, with a faith I have never seen in any scientist, that somewhere beyond our reach, God kept a book. An infinite manuscript containing the perfect proof for every mathematical truth that exists. Not just a correct proof. The proof. The one so elegant it could not be improved. He called God the supreme fascist, always with a slight smile, because God had the book and was making everyone else work for it. When Erdős said, that is from the book,
The room went still. In 1949, he and Atlas Selberg each found an elementary proof of the prime number theorem, one of the deepest results in all of mathematics. For decades, every known proof required advanced tools that placed the result beyond the reach of most mathematicians. Erdős and Selberg found proofs using nothing but elementary arithmetic. The mathematical world had believed this was impossible. How is that possible for a human being who owned nothing, had no laboratory, no permanent desk, no institution behind him? 2 years later, I handed Erdős the Cole Prize, the highest honor in number theory. He was 37 years old, no home, no position. 13 years of moving from city to city, sleeping in spare rooms, eating other people's food. I shook his hand and I thought, how did he choose this? Because he chose it. That is what people never understood. He was not homeless because the world failed him. He looked at everything the world was offering, the house, the salary, the title, and decided it was all weight. Property is a nuisance, he said. You may hear that as surrender, as a man who gave up. But consider what it meant from the inside. You and I spend enormous amounts of our lives managing what we own. Houses, cars, savings, reputations. We build and protect and maintain. And in the hours left over from all that, we do the thing we actually care about. Erdős had no hours left over. He had all of them. Every single hour went to mathematics. Ask yourself honestly, what would you do with that kind of freedom? In 1954, the United States government decided he was a security risk. He had corresponded with a Chinese mathematician who had returned to China. He had an FBI file from 1941 when he and 2 colleagues were arrested near a military radio transmitter on Long Island, too deep in a mathematical discussion to notice the restricted zone signs. The police let them go after an hour. The file stayed. They denied him re-entry. No warning, no appeal. Erdős packed his suitcase. He went to Israel, England, Australia, Hungary, when Hungary would allow it. 9 years he was barred from America. 9 years of knocking on doors across 4 continents. And in every country, on every continent, the same thing happened. The door opened. I died in February of 1957. Cancer, 53 years old, Walter Reed Hospital, Washington. Surrounded by government officials and the machinery of the world I had spent my later years serving. On the day I died, Erdős was at a table somewhere, in Tel Aviv, or Manchester, or Melbourne, his suitcase in the corner, his brain open. He kept going for 39 more years. And I know what happened, because mathematics is small enough that everything eventually reaches you. In 1963, America gave him his visa back. He returned. He kept moving. But there is something about this man that his theorems do not show you. For most of his life, Erdős had one companion, not a colleague, his mother. Anna Erdős had lost 2 daughters to scarlet fever the week Paul was born. She had kept him home until he was 10, terrified of losing him too. When his father was taken prisoner in Siberia during the First World War, she raised Paul alone. She was the one constant in a life that had no constants. From 1964, she traveled with him. To conferences, to universities, to the homes of mathematicians across the world. Erdős, the man who needed no one, who owned nothing, who had stripped his life to pure mathematics, needed his mother. She died in 1971. He was 58 years old, and for the first time in his life, Paul Erdős broke. He began taking antidepressants, then amphetamines prescribed taken every day. For years after, he threw himself into mathematics with even greater fury. 19-hour days, coffee, and Benzedrine. He worked as if the problems were the only thing standing between him and the silence. And then, in 1979, his closest friend Ronald Graham grew worried enough to make a wager. $500, Graham said. 30 days without the amphetamines. Prove you are not addicted. Erdős accepted, and he won. He went the full 30 days, collected his $500, and then said something that stopped Graham cold. "You showed me I'm not an addict. But I didn't get any work done. I'd get up in the morning and stare at a blank piece of paper. I'd have no ideas, just like an ordinary person. You've set mathematics back a month. The man who had let go of everything, who had just lost the one person he never let go of, and the thing he feared most was not grief. It was becoming ordinary. He worked with more than 500 mathematicians across 6 decades. He gave away almost everything he earned. The Wolf Prize in 1984 brought him $50,000, and he kept $720 of it. The rest went to students, to prizes for unsolved problems, to anyone who needed it more than he did. He never owned a home. He never owned a car. He never opened a bank account. On the 20th of September, 1996, in Warsaw, at a mathematics conference, he suffered a heart attack in the night and was taken to hospital, where he died hours later. He'd been working on problems all week. He was 83 years old. He owned a suitcase, some clothes, a passport stamped in more countries than most diplomats see, and 1,525 published papers, more than any mathematician in history. And then, after his death, mathematicians discovered what no one had planned. They mapped the entire network of everyone who had ever worked with Erdős, and everyone who had worked with those people, outward through the whole world of mathematics. They called it the Erdős Number, the degree of separation between any mathematician and him. Einstein was 2 steps from Erdős. Every Fields Medal winner who ever lived, every mathematician the world called the greatest of their generation, was connected. The man who owned nothing had become the center of everything. How is that possible for a human being? I opened my door in 1938. I gave him 3 days of my kitchen table and my wife's considerable patience. I could not explain him then. I cannot explain him now. But I know this. A man with nothing knocked on every door in mathematics for 60 years and built something no one who owned everything ever could. That is what it looks like when a man owns nothing and solves everything.